in Mark chapter 14, verse 53. Mark chapter 14, beginning with verse 53. They took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, "I will destroy this man-made temple, and in 3 days will build another, not made by man." Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his robes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, "Prophesy." And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. "You also were with the Nazarene Jesus," she said. But he denied it. "I don't know or understand what you're talking about," he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, "This fellow is one of them." Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean." He began to call down curses on himself, and he swore to them, "I don't know this man you're talking about." Immediately, the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him, "Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. Very early in the morning, the chief priests with the elders, the teachers of the law, and the whole Sanhedrin reached a decision. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. The chief priest accused him of many things. So again, Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer? See how many things they are accusing you of." But Jesus made no reply, and Pilate was amazed. That was the custom at the feast to release a prisoner whom the people requested. A man called Barabbas was in prison with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the uprising. The crowd came up and asked Pilate to do for them what he usually did. "Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate, knowing it was out of envy that the chief priest had handed Jesus over to him. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have Pilate release Barabbas instead. "What shall I do, then, with the one you call the king of the Jews?" Pilate asked them. "Crucify him," they shouted. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." Wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. As we look at our text, we see first the defendant. They took Jesus they took Jesus. Jesus has been betrayed, he's been arrested, he's been deserted, and now he is brought before the Jewish leaders. This group, made up of chief priests, elders, teachers of the law, when fully assembled, made up the Sanhedrin. It is possible, because this was late at night, this was an abnormal, irregular meeting, that it was just who they could get together. But they got a group of leaders together, and we notice that Peter, while he had deserted, was now following at a distance to see what was going to happen. He was sitting with the guards, with others that were warming themselves at the fire. We see the accusers, that is, these religious leaders, the chief priest, the others that are there with them. And they were looking for evidence against Jesus. They've arrested a man, and they're still in search of evidence that they can use against him. They really don't have a case, but they're looking for the evidence. They didn't find any, but they did come up with some false witnesses. As we know in our own judicial system, it is a very serious matter to be under oath and to testify falsely. There have been those who perhaps were guilty of some other crime and they could not be convicted on that. But when they were on the stand under oath, they were asked the right question and they would not perjure themselves, and so they ended up facing a penalty. They did not want to be found guilty of perjury. Well, that did not apply to these false witnesses. They were testifying falsely, but even their statements didn't agree with each other. And that's the way it is when you're telling lies. The truth is one matter. It is consistent, but you can have all kinds of lies, all kinds of untruths. There were those who gave this testimony against Jesus. We heard him say, "I will destroy this man-made temple, and in 3 days will build another." Well, now, Jesus had made a statement similar to that, but he was speaking of himself, that when he was put to death in 3 days, he would arise. But this was used against him. He was accused of speaking against the temple. But note again, it says, yet even their testimony did not agree. You needed 2 or 3 witnesses to convict someone of a crime, and they couldn't get witnesses that agreed. Well, the high priest stood up. He's going to see what he can do. And he asked Jesus, well, aren't you going to answer? Basically, you're being accused of all these things. Aren't you going to make any defense of yourself? What is it that these men are saying against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Well, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? In other words, are you the Messiah? Are you the one that we are expecting, the one that was prophesied in the Old Testament? And furthermore, Son of the Blessed One is basically saying, are you the Son of God? Jesus answers that question. He says, I am. And then he says, you will see the Son of Man, a reference he used about himself, sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, that is God, and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus, in essence, is saying, yes, I am the Messiah. I am the Son of God, and you are going to see me at the right hand of God and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus was now openly claiming to be God or to be equal with God. If that claim was made and was untrue, Jesus was guilty of blasphemy. However, Jesus made a true statement, and so it was not blasphemy. But the high priest heard the statement. He tore his robes, a sign of anguish. And he says, we don't need any more testimony. Or why do we need any more testimony? You've heard the blasphemy. It was only blasphemy if it wasn't true. The leaders thought that Jesus was speaking falsely, that he was blaspheming. He asked the others, what do you think? Well, they all condemned Jesus. They said he was worthy of death. Some began to spit on him. Now, as far as I know, I'm pretty sure about this. Throughout the entire history of the world, nobody has ever thought it was a good thing to be spat upon. If you spit on somebody, you're showing true disgust. They also blindfolded Jesus. They struck him with their fist. They said, prophesy. Maybe they were saying, who hit you, Jesus? Who hit you? The guards took him and beat him. Well, Mark once again uses that sandwich device. He's had Jesus there before the Sanhedrin. He's mentioned Peter, that Peter was following in a distance, was in the courtyard, but now he sandwiches in the middle. What happens with Peter? He was in the courtyard. One of the servant girls of the high priest came by. Peter was warming himself. It was a cold evening. There was a fire there. But she looked closely at Peter. She had seen him with Jesus, apparently. And so she says, weren't you also with that Nazarene Jesus? Number one, denial number one. Peter says, I don't know or understand what you're talking about. Well, he moves on out of the way. This servant girl isn't going to let this go. She said to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. But again, he denied it. And after a little while, those standing near to Peter, now they chime in. They say, surely you're one of them, for you're a Galilean. Do you reckon he had a Galilean accent? Something gave him away. Peter begins to call down curses on himself. He swears to them. I don't know this man you're talking about. And then that rooster crowed the second time. Peter remembered what Jesus had said to him. He broke down and wept. We return to Jesus. It's now early in the morning. The chief priests, the elders, the teachers of the law, the whole Sanhedrin by this time react. They reach a decision. They bind Jesus, lead him away to hand him over to Pilate. Here is a man who has shown no violence at all in his life. Yes, he drove out the money changers. But no, he was a man of peace. He had not resisted arrest. He had even rebuked the one who had restored the ear that had been cut off. But he's bound like a bad criminal. Why was he taken to Pilate? Why didn't the Jewish leaders take care of it? Well, Rome controlled things. And the Jews could not do their own capital punishment. Occasionally, apparently they did, but they weren't supposed to. And so they take Jesus to Pilate. And Pilate says, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, yes, it is as you say. All these accusations are brought against Jesus by the chief priest. Now, Pilate wouldn't be concerned if they were just talking religious matters. That wasn't a problem with him. But Pilate does hear all the accusations, and he says to Jesus, well, aren't you going to answer? They're accusing you of all kinds of things. But Jesus made no reply. Pilate was amazed. Then we learn that it was the custom at this time of year at the Passover for Pilate to release a prisoner, gesture of goodwill. Turns out there was a man who was incarcerated named Barabbas, and he was truly a criminal. Probably guilty of murder. He had taken part in the insurrection where people had been murdered. The crowd asked Pilate to release a prisoner, and Barabbas is actually in the running to be released. Pilate says, do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews, that is Jesus. And notice this statement. Pilate knew it was out of envy that the chief priest had handed Jesus over to him. Envy has caused so much evil in the world. Basically, the religious leaders saw a threat in Jesus. He was threatening their control of things, their power, and they didn't like it. Pilate recognized their envy. Well, the chief priest stirred up the crowd, calling for Pilate to release Barabbas instead of Jesus. Crowds can be easily stirred up. They are often hard to control once they get stirred up. Then Pilate asked the question, well, what am I supposed to do with Jesus then? The one you call the King of the Jews. And they shouted, crucify him. Now Pilate is already, as we look at all the gospel accounts, he's already basically proclaimed that Jesus was innocent of any wrongdoing. He has a problem. It's called crowd control. It's Passover time. The population of Jerusalem has swelled. You've got all these people that are excited. They've been stirred up. Pilate doesn't want word to get to Rome that he can't control things back in Jerusalem. And so, the crowd says, crucify him. Pilate says, what crime has he done? They just keep shouting, crucify him. And Pilate wanted to satisfy the crowd. This is just one man. Life is cheap. If I let him be put to death, things will calm down and everything will be good again. And so Pilate released Barabbas to them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. We see in this account several people on trial. Yes, there is Jesus, the defendant. But those who accuse him, the religious leaders, are themselves on trial. They are denying the very Son of God. They want him out of the way. The witnesses are willing to lie. They're on trial and they fail. There is Peter, the denier. He's on trial. He fails the test that evening. And then there's old Pilate, the judge. And he fails the test. Earl Macmillan said, before Jesus could be crucified, it was necessary for the Jews to convince the Romans that it was the thing to do. They really never showed that Jesus was deserving of any kind of punishment. He was an innocent man. But it was a bit of a kangaroo court. It was basically a matter of trying to keep the peace, keep things settled. The Jewish leaders had their agenda. Pilate had his job to prevent unrest. And so several that day were on trial. One of my favorite hymns, and I don't know that we know it well enough to sing it, so I'll just share the words. Jesus is standing in Pilate's hall. Jesus is standing in Pilate's hall, friendless, forsaken, betrayed by all. Hearken what meaneth the sudden call. What will you do with Jesus? Jesus is standing on trial still. You can be false to him if you will. You can be faithful through good or ill. What will you do with Jesus? Will you evade him as Pilate tried? Or will you choose him, whatever betide? Vainly you struggle from him to hide. What will you do with Jesus? Will you, like Peter, your Lord deny? Or will you scorn from his foes to fly? daring for Jesus to live or die. What will you do with Jesus? Jesus, I give thee my heart today. Jesus, I'll follow thee all the way. Gladly obeying thee, will you say, this will I do with Jesus. The chorus of the hymn has these words, what will you do with Jesus? Neutral you cannot be. Someday your heart will be asking, what will he do with me? We are on trial in a sense. What will we do with Jesus? Let us be true to him. Let us follow him.